Hi everyone and welcome back. In this video we are going to talk about some good thing about this object which is implicit binding. Means we are not explicitly doing anything implicitly how this object is bind to the functions, to the object or any other thing. So first of all let's talk about some simple example like I have the object and which is having some properties, something like this. So which is having x is 40 and it is having say hello as a function, and what it is doing, it is doing console.log this dot x. Okay, now what you're doing is object dot say hello, because this is an object and you can just directly call the method here, right? Say hello is a property and you can directly trigger the method on this, right? So you got the value 40. So this is the object, and if you try to print console.log this, that where this is pointing, this object is pointing inside this object, you will come to know that what this is having. This is having only two properties. So whenever we are calling an object or calling a method of the object, so then this object is actually currently pointing to the object itself. So whenever I do the console.log this, then you can see I got all the properties inside this, which is having two properties, x is 40 and say hello is a function, right? So whenever you call something onto the object, I didn't create a function, I didn't create a new object on that function. I just created a plain object and now I'm calling the method on this. So object is already created. I'm calling a method. So at this point of time inside an object, this will point to the object itself. You'll come to know when I talk about the functions on the C. So here these are the functions methods I created. So once you write these lines of code, nothing will happen in the memory. It will just, okay, you have the function, that's fine, you created a prototype method, that's fine. But everything, this context will get initialized when you start creating the object. Because this first name, last name will not have a memory until unless you call the object, you create an object of this person function, which we are doing onto this line. Now I got a memory allocated for first name, last name, and all these variables, and I can just see what is there in the Jabber, right? You can see that Jabber is actually object, and currently this Jabber I'm trying to print, and you can see Jabber is pointing to the person object having first name and last name property, right? So this is how it happens, right? Now you can just call the method jabber.fullName here, because it's object we have created. So obviously we can call the method now, and it will give us the full name, right? So jabber.fullName is actually giving us undefined. So I created the object first name last name. Okay, yeah, it's not giving us the undefined, it is giving us the full name. Undefined is the always return type whenever you execute something, right? So you created an object, so in these functions both gets allocated and both are binded to this object. Now a number of objects you create, every object will have these property first name and last name, right? But that is getting initialized. This binding is happening when you are creating the object. Either you take this example or you take this example. I created my object which is having some few properties and I'm calling the object, then only this context initialization is happening. Okay, then only this function is coming to know, okay, this is currently pointing to my functions and it is having all these properties, right? If you try to do some console.log here, Let's try to see what this object is currently having. So you can see the values inside this, because this object is currently pointing to the function context and it is having only these properties: name, first name, and my property, right? So okay, yeah, this is this object, and the full name is printing as this. Okay, so this is how things are happening in JavaScript, and this is the implicit binding. Obviously, whenever you are creating the object, this will point to the functions. Whenever you are actually calling a method or creating the object, this will point to the currently created object. We did it. We did console.this. This is having only two properties: export and say hello method, right? Now there can be a explicit property binding, explicit this binding, where you don't have this object available there, and you may provide or you may override the context of this object. That is explicit this binding. Implicit this binding happens in the functions in the object. Whenever you are calling the creating the object, or whenever you are calling the function, then only this object context created. So consider this simple example. So here I will call the person method. Okay, so consider this. So what will happen if I try to call this method directly and do console.log this object? What we are going to get? Because this is a plain function, I can call directly, right? So right now this object is pointing to the global function, right? Right now actually I'm running this with the node. You can also run this on the Chrome console, which is a browser environment, right, having the DOM APIs and all. But right now this object is pointing to the global object, and we are just adding few properties. But when we create a new object, right, we have already seen what actually new keywords do in the previous video. It creates the new object, okay, and it bind this object, it initialize the context of this object with this. So this object is getting bind to this object, so this object will have only first name and last name property. All these things are happening like this. Okay, it's just a simple function. So when you call it, this obviously points to the global scope. You're not creating the object, you're just calling a plain functions, and it has access to the outer scope, whatever available outside. So this will point to the global scope.